The morning alarm rang across Station Omega 7 like thunder. The sound echoed through the metal halls and sleeping quarters, waking thousands of alien soldiers from their rest. This was no ordinary space station. This was the Galactic Combat Academy, the most feared and respected military school in known space. For 300 years, warriors from across the galaxy had come here to learn how to fight. They came from distant worlds with strange names, bringing their own weapons and fighting styles. But they all left the same way, trained in the Vorthak methods of war. The Vorthak were the masters here. They had built this academy after conquering half the galaxy with their superior fighting techniques. Their bodies were perfect for battle, tall, strong, and covered in thick red armor that grew from their skin like natural shields. They had 4 eyes that could see in all directions, and sharp claws that could cut through steel. Instructor Kethvar was one of the finest Vorthak warriors alive. His red shell was marked with deep scars from 100 battles. Each scar told a story of victory. When he walked through the academy halls, even the bravest students stepped aside and bowed their heads in respect. On this particular morning, Kethvar made his way to Training Hall 7. Today he would meet his new class of first-year students. As always, most of them would be Vorthak youth, eager to learn the ancient fighting ways of their people. There would also be a few Zalanti warriors, tall, blue-skinned aliens who were almost as good at fighting as the Vorthak. Kethvar pushed. Open the heavy doors of the training hall. The room was huge, with white walls and a soft floor perfect for combat practice. Weapons hung on racks along the walls. Swords, spears, energy shields, and tools he had collected from defeated enemies across the galaxy. 25 new students stood in neat rows, waiting for him. They wore the standard academy uniform, simple gray clothes that allowed free movement during training. Most of them were young Vorthak, their shells still bright red without battle scars. A few Zalanti stood among them, their blue skin gleaming under the bright lights. But one student made Kethvar stop and stare. In the back row stood a human. The creature was small and weak-looking compared to the other students. His skin was pale and soft, without any natural armor. He had only 2 eyes, and they looked forward instead of in all directions like proper warrior eyes should. His hands had no claws, just flat fingers that looked useless for fighting. The human's name was Park Hyon. He had come from a world called Earth, in a system so far away that most academy students had never heard of it. The other recruits looked at him with clear disgust. Some whispered among themselves, wondering why such a weak creature had been allowed to join their class. Kethvar walked to the front of the room and faced his students. His 4 eyes scanned the group, studying each face. When his gaze fell on Hyon, the human looked back calmly. He did not lower his eyes or show fear like most new students did. "Welcome to the Galactic Combat Academy," Kethvar announced. His voice was deep and powerful, filling the entire hall. For 3 centuries, this institution has trained the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Every technique you will learn here has been tested in real battle. Every move has been proven effective against enemies who wanted to kill you. The students listened carefully. Even the proud young Vorthak showed respect for their instructor's words. "You come from different worlds," Kethvar continued, "but you will all learn the same methods. The Vorthak fighting system is superior to all others. This is not opinion. This is fact, proven by our conquest of 1,000 worlds." His 4 eyes fixed directly on Hyon. The human stood perfectly still, showing no reaction to the obvious challenge in the instructor's words. "Some species," Kethvar said slowly, "are known for certain qualities. The Zalanti are fast, the Krokan are tough, the Miptari are clever." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Humans are known for their creativity." A few students made clicking sounds with their mandibles, the Vorthak equivalent of laughter. They had heard stories about humans. Most of the stories described them as weak creatures who survived only by using tricks and running away from real fights. "Creativity has its place," Kethvar continued. "But in combat, proven methods save lives. Fantasy and imagination get you killed. Here, you will learn techniques that have been perfected over thousands of years. You will practice them until they become as natural as breathing. You will trust them with your life because they work. He began to pace back and forth in front of the students. His heavy footsteps echoed in the silent hall. "Look around you," he commanded. "In 1 year, half of you will wash out of this program. You will return to your home worlds as failures, unfit to call yourselves warriors. The half that remains will graduate as members of the galactic elite. They will command fleets, conquer worlds, and bring order to the chaos of space." Kethvar stopped pacing and faced the class again. "But first, you must prove you can learn. You must prove you can follow orders. You must prove you can abandon your primitive fighting methods and embrace superior ones." He activated a holographic display that showed detailed diagrams of fighting positions. The images showed Vorthak warriors in various combat stances, each movement labeled and explained. "These are the 7 basic forms," Kethvar announced. "Every attack, every defense, every counterattack flows from these foundation positions. Master them and you master combat itself." The students watched as the hologram demonstrated each form. The movements looked smooth and deadly like a violent dance. Each position flowed naturally into the next, creating combinations that could overwhelm any opponent. "Today we begin with Form 1, the Warrior's Foundation," Kethvar said. "You will practice this stance until your muscles remember it perfectly. Then you will learn how it connects to Form 2. He gestured toward the equipment racks. "Choose practice weapons. Begin with training staffs. They will teach you balance and timing without the danger of real blades." The students moved toward the weapon racks. The young Vorthak selected their staffs with confidence, having grown up watching such training. The Zelanti also moved with purpose, their warrior culture preparing them well for this moment. Jan walked slowly to the racks. He picked up a training staff and tested its weight in his hands. The weapon felt strange to him, heavier than he expected. Around him, other students were already moving into Form 1 position, copying the holographic demonstration. Kethvar watched the human struggle to hold the staff correctly. A small smile crossed his alien features. Soon, this soft creature would learn the hard truth about real combat training. Creativity might help humans survive on their backward planet, but here, only proven methods mattered. The lesson was about to begin. 3 weeks had passed since the first day of training. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Training Hall 7, casting long shadows across the practice mats. The sound of clashing weapons filled the air as students worked through their daily exercises. Park Hyon stood in the back corner of the hall, sweat dripping from his forehead as he practiced Form 3 for the 100th time that morning. His movements were getting better, but they still looked clumsy compared to the natural grace of his Vorthak classmates. The other students had made their opinions clear from the beginning. They whispered behind his back, calling him names in their alien languages. When they thought he could not hear, they made jokes about his soft skin and weak muscles. Some even placed bets on how long it would take before he quit and returned to Earth. But Hyon did not quit. Every morning he arrived early to practice. Every evening he stayed late to work on forms that came naturally to others. His hands were covered in blisters from gripping the training weapons. His body ached from exercises designed for stronger alien physiques. Yet he kept showing up, kept trying, kept learning. Instructor Kethvar watched the human's efforts with growing annoyance. The creature was persistent, he would give him that. But persistence without natural ability was worthless in real combat. Every day that Hyon remained in the class was a day wasted on someone who would never become a true warrior. Today would be different. Today, Kethvar would demonstrate the reality of combat to his students using a method that never failed to separate the weak from the strong. "Attention, students," Kethvar called out, his powerful voice cutting through the noise of practice. "Put down your weapons and gather around the center mat. Today you will witness a demonstration of advanced combat techniques." The students quickly obeyed, forming a circle around the large practice mat in the center of the hall. They sat cross-legged on the floor, their eyes bright with excitement. Demonstrations always meant watching real fighting, not just practicing basic forms. Kethvar walked to the equipment rack and selected a pair of practice blades, curved weapons with dulled edges that could hurt, but not kill. He tested their balance with expert movements, making the air sing as the weapons cut through it. Combat is not about memorizing forms, Kethvar began, holding the weapons steady. Combat is about applying those forms under pressure, against an opponent who wants to defeat you. Forms are just the foundation. Real fighting requires instinct, timing, and the will to strike without hesitation. He gestured toward the advanced students who were watching from the upper level of the training hall. Thekmor, come down here. A young Vorthak warrior descended from the upper level with confident steps. Thekmor was in his third year at the Mai Academy, one of the most promising students Kethvar had ever taught. His red shell bore the first few scars of training battles, marking him as someone who had faced real opponents and won. The advanced student bowed respectfully to his instructor before taking his position on the mat. He moved with the fluid grace that marked all skilled Vorthak fighters, his four eyes scanning his surroundings while his hands remained relaxed and ready. Observe carefully, Kethvar told his first-year students. Thekmor will demonstrate combination 7, a sequence that links forms 2, 4, and 6 into a single attacking pattern. This technique has been used successfully in actual combat for over 200 years. Kethvar handed Thekmor a practice weapon identical to his own. The advanced student tested its weight and nodded his readiness. Begin when ready, Kethvar commanded. Thekmor launched into the attack without warning. His movements were perfect, exactly as taught in the academy manuals. He started with Form 2, a high feint designed to draw the opponent's guard upward. As his instructor raised his weapon to block, Thekmor smoothly transitioned to Form 4, dropping low and striking toward Kethvar's legs. But Kethvar was ready. He shifted his stance and blocked the low attack, then immediately counterattacked with his own combination. The two Vorthak warriors moved in a deadly dance, their weapons clashing in precise patterns that had been refined over centuries of warfare. The first-year students watched in amazement. This was real fighting, not the slow practice movements they had been learning. Every strike was calculated, every defense perfect, every counterattack flowing naturally from established techniques. The demonstration continued for several minutes, with neither fighter gaining a clear advantage. Finally, Kethvar stepped back and raised his hand, calling an end to the exercise. Excellent work, he told Thekmor, who bowed and stepped off the mat. That, students, is what you will be able to do after 3 years of proper training. The instructor's four eyes swept across his first-year class, noting their expressions of awe and respect. Most of them understood the message. This was the level they needed to reach, and it would take years of dedicated practice to get there. But then his gaze fell on Hyon, and his satisfaction turned to irritation. The human was watching intently, but not with the proper expression of humble amazement. Instead, he looked thoughtful, as if he were analyzing what he had just seen instead of simply admiring it. An idea formed in Kethvar's mind. A cruel idea, perhaps, but one that would finally teach this persistent human his proper place. Hyon, Kethvar called out. Stand up. The human rose to his feet, confusion clear on his face. Around him, the other students began to whisper excitedly. They sensed that something interesting was about to happen. You have been training with us for 3 weeks, Kethvar continued. It is time to test your progress. You will spar with Thekmor, using the techniques you have learned. Shocked murmurs ran through the group of students. A first year fighting a third year was unheard of, especially when that first year was a weak human. It would be a massacre. Instructor, Jan said quietly. I have only learned 3 basic forms. Thekmor knows advanced combinations that I have never seen before. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. Combat is not fair, human. Your enemies will not wait for you to learn everything before they attack. You will fight with what you know or you will lose. Those are the only options. He gestured toward the equipment rack. Choose your weapon. Hyon looked around at his classmates. Some seemed excited to watch him fail. Others looked uncomfortable, as if they knew this was not a fair test. But none of them would speak up against their instructor's decision. The human walked slowly to the weapon rack and selected a practice blade similar to the ones the advanced fighters had used. It felt heavy in his hands, much heavier than the training staff he had been using for weeks. Thekmor took his position on the mat, his confidence clear in every movement. He had fought dozens of practice matches against other advanced students and never lost. Fighting a first-year human would be easier than his morning warm-up exercises. Standard Academy rules, Kethvar announced. First to land 3 clean hits wins. No strikes to the head or neck. Begin when I give the signal. Hyon stepped onto the mat, his weapon held in what he hoped was proper Form 1 position. His heart was beating fast, but his face remained calm. He had known this moment would come eventually. The academy was designed to test students, to push them beyond their comfort zones. Around the mat, 24 alien students waited to watch their human classmate get beaten. In the upper level, advanced students had gathered to witness what they expected to be a very short fight. Kethvar raised his hand, then brought it down sharply. Begin. Thekmor moved like lightning across the practice mat. His opening attack was textbook perfect, exactly what every third-year student learned to do against weaker opponents. He came forward with a high slash designed to test Hyon's defensive skills, followed immediately by a low thrust toward the human's midsection. Hyon tried to block with Form 2, the way he had been taught. His blade met Thekmor's weapon with a sharp clang, but the force of the impact nearly knocked the sword from his hands. The Vorthak was much stronger than him, and the power behind each strike was overwhelming. The low thrust came next, exactly as Hyon expected from watching the earlier demonstration. He attempted to use Form 3 to deflect it, but his timing was off. The dulled blade caught him across the ribs, sending a sharp pain through his side. First point to Thekmor, Instructor Kethvar announced. The watching students made excited, clicking sounds with their mandibles. This was going exactly as they had predicted. The human was completely outclassed. But something strange happened as the fighters reset for the second exchange. Instead of looking defeated or discouraged, Hyon seemed more focused than before. He studied Thekmor's stance, watched how the Vorthak held his weapon, noted the rhythm of his breathing. Ready for round 2, soft skin, Thekmor taunted, using the insulting term that many Vorthak applied to humans. Hyon said nothing. He simply adjusted his grip on his weapon and waited. This time Thekmor decided to end the fight quickly. He launched into Combination 4, a complex sequence that linked 3 different forms into a devastating attack pattern. It was designed to overwhelm opponents with speed and precision, giving them no chance to mount an effective defense. The attack came in waves. First a diagonal slash from upper right to lower left, then an immediate reversal to slash from upper left to lower right, followed by a straight thrust toward the center of the opponent's body. Each move flowed perfectly into the next, exactly as the Academy manuals prescribed. Hyon managed to block the first slash barely. The second slash caught him on the shoulder, tearing his gray uniform and drawing a thin line of blood. The watching students cheered as their favorite scored his second hit. Second point to Thekmor, Kethvar declared. One more hit and the match is over. But again, something unexpected happened. As Hyon backed away from the successful attack, he did not retreat to the edge of the mat as most defeated fighters did. Instead, he circled slowly, keeping his distance while his 2 eyes remained fixed on Thekmor's 4. The human was learning. With each exchange, he understood his opponent a little better. Thekmor's attacks were beautiful and effective, but they followed predictable patterns. The Academy had taught him to fight like every other Academy graduate, with perfect technique and absolute confidence in proven methods. For the third exchange, Thekmor decided to use his most advanced technique. Combination 9 was a move that only final-year students were allowed to learn. It required perfect timing and flawless execution, but when performed correctly, it was nearly impossible to defend against. The Vorthak warrior began with a feint to the left, then spun completely around to build momentum for a devastating slash from the right. As he completed his spin, he would drop into a low stance and thrust upward, catching his opponent completely off guard. Thekmor executed the first part of the combination perfectly. His feint was convincing, his spin smooth and powerful. The watching students held their breath as they witnessed one of the Academy's most difficult techniques being performed by one of its best students. But Hyon did not react the way he was supposed to. Instead of following the feint and exposing himself to the spinning attack, the human simply stepped forward and punched Thekmore in the chest. It was not a sword thrust or a martial arts technique or any kind of recognized combat move. It was just a simple, straight punch with his left fist while his right hand still held his practice sword. The punch caught Thekmore in the middle of his spinning technique, when all his weight was committed to the complex movement, and he could not change direction or defend himself. The impact lifted the larger alien completely off his feet and sent him crashing into the wall 20 feet away. Thekmore hit the wall with a loud thud and slumped to the floor, unconscious. The training hall fell completely silent. For a long moment, nobody moved or spoke. The advanced students watching from above leaned forward in disbelief. The first-year students stared with their mouths open. Instructor Kethvar stood frozen, all four of his eyes wide with shock. In 300 years of academy history, nothing like this had ever happened. A first-year student had just defeated a third year with a technique that was not taught in any manual, did not appear in any textbook, and violated every principle of proper combat training. Finally, Kethvar found his voice. "What did you just do?" Hyun lowered his practice sword and rubbed his knuckles, which were slightly sore from the impact. "I hit him, sir." "That was not a recognized combat technique," Kethvar said, his voice rising. "You used an unstructured, untrained attack that has no place in proper warfare." "Yes, sir," Hyun replied calmly. "It was just a punch." "Just a punch?" Kethvar's mandibles clicked rapidly, showing his extreme agitation. "You defeated one of my best students with a crude, primitive gesture that any barbarian could perform." Hyun looked at his unconscious opponent, who was starting to stir as medical students rushed to check on him. "Sometimes the simplest solution works best, sir." The instructor strode across the mat until he was standing directly in front of the human. His height advantage meant he towered over Hyun, casting a dark shadow across the smaller figure. "Simple. Solutions get you killed in real combat," Kethvar growled. "Proper technique, proven methods, disciplined training. These things keep warriors alive. What you did was luck, nothing more." "Maybe," Hyun said quietly. "But Thekmore is the one on the ground." A ripple of shocked whispers ran through the watching students. No first year had ever spoken to an instructor with such confidence, especially not after performing such an unorthodox action. Kethvar felt his anger rising. This human was challenging everything he believed, everything he had spent his life teaching. The Academy's reputation was built on the superiority of Vorthak fighting methods. If crude human techniques could defeat trained warriors, what did that say about 3 centuries of military tradition? "You will report to my office after class," Kethvar commanded. "We will discuss your future at this academy." He turned to address the rest of the students, who were still staring at the scene in amazement. "Let this be a lesson to all of you," he announced. "Unstructured attacks may occasionally succeed against unprepared opponents, but they will fail against truly skilled fighters." Thekmore was overconfident and did not expect such a primitive response. In real combat, such mistakes are fatal. But even as he spoke the words, Kethvar knew they sounded hollow. The human had not won through luck or his opponent's overconfidence. He had won by recognizing the weakness in a complex technique and exploiting it with devastating simplicity. As the class ended and students filed out of the training hall, many of them cast curious glances back at Hyun. The human gathered his equipment quietly, showing no signs of celebration or pride in his unexpected victory. But something had changed in Training Hall 7 that day. For the first time in Academy history, a student had proven that there might be more than one way to win a fight. And that realization would spread through the school like wildfire, challenging everything the instructors thought they knew about combat training. Hyun walked toward the exit, unaware that his simple punch had just started a revolution. Word of the unusual fight spread through the academy faster than a plasma fire. By evening, every student on Station Omega 7 had heard about the human who knocked out a third year with a simple punch. Some told the story with admiration, others with disgust, but everyone told it. In the student dining hall, conversations buzzed with excitement and confusion. Groups of alien cadets gathered around tables, arguing about what they had witnessed. The advanced students insisted it was a fluke, a lucky accident that would never happen again. But some of the younger students were not so sure. Park Hyon sat alone at a corner table, eating his dinner in silence. He had always eaten alone since arriving at the academy, but tonight felt different. Other students kept glancing in his direction, whispering among themselves when they thought he could not see them. 3 tables away, a group of first-year students were having a heated discussion. The group included Kim Nari, a Zelanti female who had shown promise in combat training, and Lee Daiho, another human who had arrived at the academy 2 weeks after Hyon. "I still do not understand how it worked," Nari was saying, her blue skin darkening with confusion. Thekmore knew every defensive technique in the manual. How could a simple punch get through his guard? Maybe that was the point, Daiho suggested. Thekmore was ready for academy techniques, not something completely different. A young Vorthak named Rektal clicked his mandibles dismissively. It was luck, nothing more. If they fought again tomorrow, Thekmore would win easily. But what if it was not luck, Nari asked. What if there are effective techniques that we have never learned because they are not in the official curriculum? The question hung in the air like a dangerous idea. For 3 centuries, the academy had taught that their methods were the best possible way to fight. Students were expected to master the established techniques, not question whether better alternatives might exist. Over the following days, Instructor Kethvar noticed disturbing changes in his classroom. Students who had previously focused on perfecting their assigned forms were now experimenting with variations. Some tried to combine techniques in new ways. Others questioned why certain movements were considered correct when simpler approaches seemed to work just as well. The problem started small. During a lesson on defensive stances, Nari asked why they needed to maintain such rigid postures when slight adjustments seemed to provide better balance. When practicing weapon combinations, Daiho wondered aloud whether skipping certain steps might make the attacks faster and more effective. But the real disruption came from Hyon himself. The human continued to attend every class and participate in every exercise, but his approach to training was completely different from his classmates. When learning a 7-step sword sequence, he would master the first 3 steps, skip the middle ones, and somehow still achieve the intended result. When practicing formation fighting, he would break away from his assigned position to help struggling teammates, creating chaos that somehow worked better than the original plan. "This is unacceptable," Kethvar muttered during a private meeting with other instructors. Students are supposed to learn discipline, not creativity. They should follow established procedures, not invent their own methods. Instructor Vathak, who taught advanced combat theory, nodded in agreement. "I have seen similar problems in my classes. Students are questioning techniques that have been proven effective for centuries. Some are even suggesting that simpler approaches might be superior to complex ones. The human is corrupting the others," added Instructor Morthek, who specialized in weapons training. "His unorthodox methods are spreading like a disease through the student body. If we do not stop this now, our entire curriculum will be undermined." But stopping it proved more difficult than they expected. The changes in student behavior were subtle and hard to punish directly. When Nari improved her combat performance by modifying a traditional stance, could Kethvar discipline her for being too effective? When Daiho achieved better results by simplifying a complex technique, was that really a violation of academy rules? The most frustrating part was that these unconventional approaches often worked. Students who incorporated Hyon's direct, simple methods into their training showed marked improvement in sparring matches. They became more adaptable, more creative, and more willing to think for themselves during combat situations. Kethvar found himself facing a crisis he had never experienced. In decades of teaching, his carefully structured lessons were being disrupted not by rebellious students but by better results. How could he argue against techniques that made his pupils more effective fighters? The situation came to a head during a group exercise designed to teach coordinated attack patterns. Kethvar had divided his class into teams of 5, each group assigned to practice a specific formation that had been used successfully in real battles throughout galactic history. Team Alpha, which included Hyan, was supposed to execute Formation 12, a complex arrangement where each fighter had a specific role and timing was critical to success. The formation had been developed by Vorthak military strategists and refined through centuries of warfare. But when Team Alpha took their turn to demonstrate the formation, something went wrong, or rather, something went right in a way that was not supposed to happen. The exercise began normally. 4 students moved into their assigned positions while the 5th prepared to execute the critical timing element that would make the formation effective. But as they began their coordinated attack, one team member stumbled and fell out of position. In a normal academy exercise, this would mean failure. The formation would collapse, the team would receive a poor grade, and they would repeat the exercise until they performed it correctly. Instead, Hyan immediately broke from his own assigned position and moved to cover the gap left by his fallen teammate. This forced the other team members to adapt their movements as well, creating a completely improvised attack pattern that bore no resemblance to Formation 12. The improvised attack was devastatingly effective. It caught the defending team completely off guard and achieved the objective faster than the original formation would have. Kethvar stared at the result in stunned silence. The exercise had been a complete failure by Academy standards, yet it had been far more successful than any proper execution he had ever seen. That was not Formation 12, he finally managed to say. No, sir, Hyan agreed. But it worked. The objective of this exercise is to learn Formation 12, not to invent new formations. Why, sir? The simple question hit Kethvar like a physical blow. In all his years of teaching, no student had ever asked why they needed to learn a specific technique. Students were supposed to trust that their instructors knew best and follow orders without question. Because Formation 12 has been proven effective in real combat situations, Kethvar replied. But his voice lacked its usual confidence. So has what we just did, Hyan pointed out. And it worked better. Around the training hall, other students were nodding in agreement. They had all seen the improvised attack succeed where the traditional formation might have struggled. Some were beginning to wonder why they spent so much time memorizing ancient battle plans when adaptive thinking seemed to produce superior results. Kethvar felt the foundations of his teaching career crumbling beneath his feet. Everything he had believed about proper military training was being challenged by a quiet human who asked uncomfortable questions and produced undeniable results. That night, alone in his quarters, the instructor stared out at the stars and tried to understand what was happening to his academy. For 300 years, the Vorthak system had produced the galaxy's finest warriors. Their methods were precise, proven, and respected throughout known space. But now a single human was demonstrating that there might be better ways to fight, better ways to think, better ways to adapt to unexpected situations. And worst of all, other students were learning from his example. Kethvar realized that he faced a choice that would define the rest of his career. He could cling to tradition and try to force his students back into the old patterns of thinking. Or he could admit that perhaps after 3 centuries of teaching the same lessons, it might be time to learn something new. The decision would have to wait for tomorrow. But deep in his heart, Kethvar already knew which path he would choose. The Academy's faculty meeting room had never felt so tense. 12 senior instructors sat around the polished metal table, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright anger. At the head of the table, Academy Commandant Thorgrim reviewed reports that painted a disturbing picture of their once orderly institution. Combat efficiency scores are up 17% across all first-year classes, Thorgrim announced, his deep voice echoing off the walls. Adaptive thinking assessments show the highest improvements in Academy history. Student satisfaction ratings have reached levels we have never seen before. He set down the datapad and looked around the table at his fellow Vorthak educators. So, why am I receiving complaints from half the faculty about declining discipline and unauthorized teaching methods? Instructor Kethvar shifted uncomfortably in his seat. As the teacher most directly affected by the changes, all eyes turned to him for answers. The students are abandoning proven techniques in favor of improvised solutions, Kethvar explained. They question established methods instead of trusting the wisdom of centuries. This human, Park Hyun, has infected my entire class with dangerous ideas about creative combat. Dangerous ideas that are producing better fighters, Commandant. Thorgrim observed dryly. Better test scores do not make better warriors, Instructor Vethek interjected. Real combat requires discipline, precision, and adherence to proven tactics. These students will fail when faced with actual battlefield conditions. Thorgrim activated a holographic display showing combat simulation results from the past month. The data was undeniable. Students who incorporated unconventional methods were outperforming their traditionally trained classmates in every measurable category. The simulations suggest otherwise, the Commandant said. Classes that include adaptive techniques are winning 73% more engagements than control groups using standard methods. The room fell silent as the instructors absorbed this information. Everything they had believed about proper military education was being challenged by objective data. There is only one way to settle this debate, Kethvar said suddenly, his voice filled with determination. I will demonstrate the superiority of traditional methods through direct combat. I challenge the human to single combat under formal academy rules. A shocked murmur ran around the table. Faculty challenging students was extremely rare and generally discouraged. The power imbalance made such contests inherently unfair. That would be highly irregular, Thorgrim warned. You have decades of experience against a first-year student with less than 2 months of training. Exactly, Kethvar replied. When proper technique defeats improvised methods, it will prove once and for all that our traditional curriculum is superior. The students will return to disciplined learning, and this disruption will end. The other instructors exchanged uncertain glances. They understood Kethvar's frustration, but they also recognized the risks involved. If somehow the human won, it would validate everything he represented and completely undermine their authority. And if you lose? Thorgrim asked quietly. Kethvar's mandibles clicked with absolute confidence. I will not lose. 3 decades of training and 200 combat victories do not fall to lucky punches and creative thinking. After much debate, the faculty agreed to allow the challenge under strict conditions. The match would be held in the main arena, open to all academy students and staff. Standard dueling weapons would be used, with safety protocols to prevent serious injury. The bout would continue until one fighter yielded or was rendered unable to continue. News of the upcoming challenge spread through the academy like wildfire. Within hours, every student and staff member knew about the unprecedented match between Instructor Kethvar and the human who had been disrupting traditional training methods. The reactions were predictably divided. Most Vorthak students supported their instructor, confident that his superior training and experience would easily defeat the upstart human. The alien species were more mixed in their opinions, with some hoping to see the underdog succeed against overwhelming odds. But it was among the human students that the strongest emotions ran. Lee Daeho and the few other Earth natives at the academy saw the match as a test of their species' worthiness. If Hyun lost badly, it would confirm every stereotype about human weakness and end any hope of acceptance in galactic military circles. The night before the challenge, Hyun sat alone in his quarters, reviewing everything he had learned during his time at the academy. Unlike his classmates, he was not practicing combat forms or sharpening weapons. Instead, he was thinking about the nature of conflict itself. Every technique he had been taught followed predictable patterns. Defense led to counterattack, which led to defensive response, which led to escalation. The academy's methods were like an elaborate dance where both partners knew all the steps in advance. But real fights were not dances. They were chaotic, unpredictable events where the side that adapted fastest usually won. The academy taught students to be excellent dancers, but Hyun wondered if they were prepared for situations where the music suddenly stopped. A soft chime announced a visitor at his door. When Hyun opened it, he found Kim Nari standing in the corridor, her blue skin pale with worry. I wanted to wish you luck tomorrow, she said quietly. Many of us are hoping you succeed. Thank you, Hyun replied. But I think Instructor Kethvar is right about one thing. Luck will not be enough. Then, what will be? Hyun considered the question carefully. Understanding. The instructor expects me to fight like a student. He has prepared for every technique I have been taught, every combination I have practiced. His experience will counter everything in my limited training. So how do you win? A small smile crossed Hyun's face. By not fighting like a student. The next morning, the main arena was packed with spectators. Students filled the circular seating areas while faculty members occupied the elevated viewing boxes. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation and nervous energy. In the center of the arena floor stood a regulation dueling circle, marked by glowing lines that would monitor the fight and ensure safety protocols were followed. Weapon racks lined the walls, offering everything from traditional Vorthak blades to exotic alien armaments. Instructor Kethvar entered the arena to thunderous applause from the Vorthak students. He wore ceremonial combat armor that gleamed under the bright lights, each piece engraved with symbols representing his victories and honors. In his hands he carried his personal dueling weapon, a curved blade that had never known defeat. The cheering died to respectful silence as Park Hyun walked into the arena. He wore simple training clothes and carried only a standard academy practice sword. Next to his opponent's impressive appearance, the human looked small and unprepared. Academy. Commandant Thorgrim stood and addressed the gathered crowd. This formal challenge will determine whether traditional combat methods or adaptive techniques represent the future of military training, he announced. Let both fighters demonstrate their skills with honor. The two combatants took their positions in the dueling circle. Kethvar raised his weapon in the classical salute that had opened formal duels for centuries. Hyun copied the gesture, though his movements lacked the fluid grace of his opponent. You still have time to yield, Kethvar offered quietly. This does not have to end with your humiliation. Hyun met the instructor's four-eyed gaze with steady calm. Thank you for the lesson, sir. All of them. The words carried more weight than either fighter realized. In a few moments, one philosophy of combat would triumph over another, and the academy would never be the same. Commandant Thorgrim raised his hand, then brought it down sharply. Begin. The arena fell completely silent as the two fighters began to circle each other. 3,000 students and faculty members held their breath, watching a confrontation that would reshape everything they understood about combat training. Instructor. Kethvar moved with the confidence of a master who had never been defeated. His stance was perfect, his grip flawless, his four eyes tracking every tiny movement his opponent made. Decades of experience had taught him to read fighters like books, and what he saw in Park Hyun gave him complete confidence. The human was nervous. His breathing was slightly fast, his grip on the practice sword a fraction too tight. He moved like someone who knew he was outmatched but was trying to hide it. Every sign pointed to a quick victory for traditional methods over improvised thinking. Kethvar decided to end the fight with his signature opening, a combination that had defeated hundreds of opponents over the years. He would feint toward Hyun's left shoulder, draw the defensive response, then flow into a devastating attack on the right side. It was elegant, proven, and had never failed him. He executed the feint perfectly. His blade moved in a precise arc toward Hyun's shoulder, exactly as he had practiced 10,000 times. The human took the bait, raising his weapon to block the false attack just as predicted. But instead of flowing into the second part of his combination, Kethvar found himself stumbling forward off balance. Hyun had not simply blocked the feint. He had stepped aside and used the instructor's own momentum against him. The move was not in any academy manual. It was simple, direct, and completely unexpected. While Kethvar struggled to regain his balance, Hyun could have struck him easily. Instead, the human stepped back and waited for his instructor to recover. Interesting, Kethvar muttered, his confidence shaken but not broken. You have learned to avoid attacks. Now let us see how you handle a real assault. He launched into Form 7, one of the most complex attack sequences in the Vorthak arsenal. The combination involved 12 separate strikes, each flowing seamlessly into the next, designed to overwhelm opponents with speed and precision. It was a technique that required years to master and had ended countless duels in seconds. Hyun watched the attack come with calm focus. He had seen this form practiced dozens of times in class, studied its patterns, understood its rhythm. As the first strike came toward him, he did something that violated every principle of academy training. He ducked, not with any formal defensive technique, not following any established counterform, but with a simple instinctive movement that took him completely out of the attack's path. The blade whistled over his head as he dropped low, then immediately popped back up inside Kethvar's guard. Before the instructor could adjust to this impossible response, Hyun delivered a short punch to his armored chest. The impact was not enough to cause serious damage, but it disrupted Kethvar's balance and broke his concentration. The complex combination collapsed into confusion as the Vorthak warrior tried to process what had just happened. "That is not how you defend against Form 7, Kethvar protested, backing away to reset his stance. "No, sir," Hyun agreed. But it worked. The watching crowd began to murmur with excitement. This was not going as anyone had expected. The human was not trying to match his instructor's technical skill. He was doing something entirely different. Kethvar felt the first stirrings of real concern. His opening attacks had been neutralized not by superior technique, but by responses that made no sense according to everything he had been taught. How could he plan strategy against an opponent who did not follow any recognizable patterns? He decided to abandon complex techniques in favor of simple, overwhelming force. Drawing on his natural Vorthak strength and speed, he launched a series of powerful strikes designed to break through any defense through sheer power. But Hyun did not try to block the attacks. Instead, he moved constantly, never where Kethvar expected him to be, never responding in ways that made tactical sense. When the instructor struck high, the human went low. When Kethvar expected a retreat, Hyun advanced. When logic demanded one response, the human chose another. The fight began to take on a strange rhythm. Kethvar would execute perfect techniques. That should have ended the bout, only to find his opponent somewhere else entirely. Hyun would counter with moves that should not have worked, yet somehow always did. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Kethvar began to breathe heavily as his perfect conditioning met the reality of chasing an opponent who refused to fight predictably. His attacks grew less precise as frustration replaced confidence. Finally, the moment came that would be remembered in academy history forever. Kethvar, desperate to end the humiliating chase, committed everything to one final attack. He raised his blade high above his head in the classic finishing position of Form 12, preparing to bring it down with all his strength in a blow that no defense could stop. It was exactly the kind of big, telegraphed attack that Hyun had been waiting for. As the blade began its downward arc, the human simply stepped forward and threw a straight right punch. Not a sword thrust, not a martial arts technique, not any kind of recognized combat move, just a basic human punch delivered with perfect timing. The punch caught Kethvar in the center of his chest plate just as his weight was committed to the overhead strike. The instructor's forward momentum combined with the punch's impact to create a force that lifted him completely off his feet. He flew backward 10 feet and crashed to the arena floor, his weapon spinning away across the polished surface. The arena erupted in chaos. Students jumped to their feet, shouting in amazement and disbelief. Faculty members stared in stunned silence as their colleague lay motionless on the ground. In the space of 47 seconds, everything they thought they knew about combat had been turned upside down. Hyun walked over to where Kethvar lay and extended his hand to help the instructor up. For a moment, the Vorthak warrior just stared at the offered assistance, his mind trying to process what had just happened. "How?" Kethvar asked as he accepted the help and climbed to his feet. "You taught me," Hyun replied simply. "Every technique has weaknesses. Every pattern can be predicted. Every complex system has simple solutions if you look for them." The instructor dusted off his ceremonial armor and looked around at the cheering crowd. His defeat should have filled him with shame and anger. Instead, he felt something he had not experienced in decades: the excitement of learning something completely new. I have been teaching the same lessons for 30 years, Kethvar said slowly. I thought I knew everything about combat. You know more about fighting than I ever will, Hian assured him, but maybe there is room for different approaches to work together. Academy Commandant Thorgrim descended from his viewing box to the arena floor. His expression was unreadable as he approached the two fighters. Instructor Kethvar, he said formally, do you yield this challenge? The old warrior looked at his student, then at the thousands of watchers who had witnessed something unprecedented. When he spoke, his voice carried across the silent arena. I yield, he announced, and I request permission to learn from this human's methods. The crowd's reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Students from every species cheered as they realized they were witnessing the birth of something new. The rigid barriers between instructor and student, between traditional and innovative, between right and wrong ways of thinking, were crumbling before their eyes. In the months that followed, the Galactic Combat Academy underwent the most dramatic transformation in its 300-year history. The curriculum expanded to include adaptive combat theory alongside traditional forms. Students learned not just what to think, but how to think when faced with unexpected situations. Instructor Kethvar became one of the program's most enthusiastic supporters. He discovered that teaching students to break rules was far more challenging and rewarding than teaching them to follow them. His classes became laboratories for innovation, where ancient techniques were tested against new ideas and both were strengthened in the process. The Academy's graduates began to distinguish themselves throughout the galaxy not just as excellent fighters, but as creative problem solvers who could adapt to any situation. They brokered peace treaties instead of just winning wars, solved conflicts through innovation instead of just overwhelming force, and brought new perspectives to challenges that had seemed impossible. Years later, when Park Hyan had become a respected instructor himself, students would ask him about the secret of his success. His answer was always the same. There is no secret, he would tell them. Just remember that the best technique is the one your opponent does not expect. The strongest defense is the ability to think differently, and sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe is an open mind. The Academy's new motto, carved in stone above the main entrance, reflected this philosophy. Strength through adaptation, victory through understanding. But those who knew the real story understood the deeper truth. Sometimes change comes not through grand gestures or revolutionary declarations, but through simple actions performed with perfect timing. Sometimes the most important lessons are taught not by teachers but by students willing to ask why things must be done a certain way. And sometimes all it takes to rewrite the future is one well-placed punch and the courage to think differently.